2 flutes on the front, 1 on the back. So you're going to hear different sounds.
Choose positive words and experience positive results. The thoughts I think and the words I speak have tremendous power. They can influence my life in either positive or negative ways, for they affect the expectations I hold in my heart and the outcomes I experience in my life. Today, I choose to use positive thoughts, positive words. I make a conscious effort to think positive thoughts and to act in positive ways. By doing so, I open my life and the lives of those I pray for to the ever-present abundance of God. If I'm anxious about a particular situation or event, I change my thoughts about it. I approach it with new eyes, spiritual eyes. By expressing my faith in God and holding positive thoughts, my expectations are elevated to a higher level, and the outcomes I envision are revealed in wonderful looked at them and said, "For mortals, it is impossible. But for God, all things are possible." And so it is. Let's take these thoughts into the silence.
Let's pray. Almighty Spirit of God, we know you're the only power in the universe and that you're only good and that you are present everywhere, including each of us here today. And that power, as it flows through us, as the Father of truth, as the Spirit of truth. And we know, as the Master Teacher said, that the truth is what sets us free. And in this moment, and this stillness, and this silence, we say yes to that. To the freedom at all levels of our being. Yes. And so it is. Amen. So last Sunday we began this journey through many chapters of a woman that I consider one of the most powerful women ever to have written in a spiritual vein. I call it's the golden standard. It's the best of the best. But so many times it gets overlooked because she did 12 lessons in 87 pages. And it's like, well, it couldn't be that important. It's not 400 pages. But she somehow had the genius to be able to pull through the divine, pull through her, to be able to get it in segments that is so powerful. And as I said last week, I've been reading it now for over 30 years. And I'm going to make a public confession today, a little bit later on, that it just jumped up and grabbed me, and I realized after 30 years, I missed one of the most important pieces of her teaching. So we went through last week chapters 1, 2, and 3, and we'll talk briefly about those just to set the stage for where we're headed today. But Dr. Emily Cady, just quickly for those who weren't here, you can see when she was born, 1848. She began to teach in a one-room schoolhouse below Syracuse. And at 38 years old, she had the audacity to say, I'm going to become one of the first medical physicians in the United States. Now, she stood almost 6 foot tall. Back in the 1800s, the men were shorter than we are even today. So she literally stood head and shoulders above almost everyone in New York City. And later on, she had the audacity to listen to the divine coming through her and became one of the most powerful spiritual healers that no one ever knew. She wouldn't allow anyone. There's only about 2 or 3 photos of her. One when she was very young, and then one when she was older that were used. And after no one got to take a picture, no one came to see her. She would not go into the public because she said, I never want to allow my ego, my personality to get in the way of the divine teaching. It's about the lessons. And I so respect her for that, because she could have been at every convention all over the world teaching these, but she didn't. And this was her advice for all of us, and I think it's so important of any spiritual teaching that you come upon. For a time, let go of the old, so you're not trying to put new wine into an old wineskin. It doesn't work. Back in the day when they did that, what happens, new wine is fermenting. If you put it in an old wineskin that was dried and crinkled up, it would burst and the new wine would fall to the ground. It doesn't work. But she said at the end of this, if it's not good for you, if it's not true, let it go and go on back to what you believed before. But for a period of time, let your mind open to new possibilities. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, that is void of ego, right? It's not about her. It was about the lessons. It was about the truth. So last week we looked at these three, and just briefly, lesson number 1 is about bondage or liberty. We get to choose. And every one of us here today is in bondage of some sort, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, relationship-wise. And she said, find out what that bondage is, what's holding you back for the unlimited possibilities of the allness of God. It doesn't have to be a big thing, because you can do it on, quote, a small thing, and once you learn the process, it works for everything. So it's worthwhile doing the work. Number 2, lesson number 2 is statement of being. This is where and she said there's 3 things that we have to get straight in our own minds. Who and what is God? Who and what are we? And what is our relationship in that? I believe most of us on a spiritual journey get confused in all of that. We waffle back and forth. She said, you got to get clear. You got to get in your mind what's true for you, and you got to work from that truth. And we can all know the truth. How do we know the truth? We feel it. You all know what truth is, right? You know when you're in truth. You know when you hear truth, and you know when you don't hear truth. Because we have this gauge inside that says, that's true for me. And finally, number 3 lesson was about thinking. This is where we take these ideas of moving from bondage to freedom, and it happens in our thinking process. We had a wonderful discussion on Tuesday night about, is God impersonal or personal? And the answer we came up with is both. God is impersonal in that certain laws of God, certain absolute truths, happen no matter what you and I do. And it has nothing to do with you if you're not connected with that and in alignment with that truth. It just goes on by you. True for other people who connect with it and make it personal. And when we get now into chapters 4, 5, and 6, is about connecting with that source and making it personal. Otherwise, it just passes us by. And we stayed locked in the bondage that we picked up from belief systems of lack and limit, from our childhood, from our parents, from teachers, from coaches, from spouses. And she's saying there's no limit, there's no lack to your and my life. None. Unless you and I want to allow it to be there. And to me, that's the most empowering thing. This is what made my soul sing 30 years ago. And when I wish I had kept a record of how many times I've read this short 88-page book. And it's not a matter of how often, but what I found is every time I go back to it, I learn something that I missed. That's when you know it's from the divine. Because it changes it based upon where you are in consciousness. And more truth comes through, more understanding comes through. And she's a big, big believer in James. Just don't listen to this stuff. Don't just be hearers of the word. You gotta do it. And she's very upfront about it. It's hard work. It's not easy work. Not complex. The ego makes it complex. But we have to be diligent about doing it consistently. That's the work that we have to do to make the change. Why? Because what was consistently put into your subconscious was done over time, and you reinforced it, and you brought other things in to make sure that you knew that was true about you. And to be able to move from that which is error belief, or not true, to something that is true, takes work. It takes the diligence to stay with it over time. So lesson number 4 is denials. I've said before, I don't like this word. I just don't. I don't know why. So much, except I like release better, but we're going to stay true to her teachings today. But I found that it works for me because I don't get hung up on the word, because it's about releasing some error beliefs, releasing some old beliefs out of our subconscious. But denials work, because here's where it comes from. The master teacher Jesus said this, and this I want you to see at the very end. It says, follow me, follow my example. Never, ever, ever, ever in the New Testament did Jesus ever say, worship me. Never. He said, follow my example and I will show you how to have the kingdom of heaven where and when? Here and now. He never said it was after we die in some pearly gate somewhere. He said it's here and now. And you can have it if you're willing to follow these examples that I'm bringing forth. This is exactly what he was teaching 2,000 years ago. And what I love about Dr. Emily Cady is that she took those truths and brought them into the mid-1800s. And when we can still use them, maybe change a little bit of the language, but it's all in alignment with the absolute truth that was taught back then. And he said, if anyone desires to have this kind of life, what kind of life? The life that God wills for you. What is that? Prosperity, abundance, a perfect health, happiness. That's the will for the greatest creation that ever happened. We are the greatest creation of the Almighty. And he wants the best. He wants all of it for you and me. The problem is you and I don't believe we're worthy or not good enough or it's not even possible. Yeah, it is. But we have to begin to follow the process that she's teaching here to get us in alignment with that belief, which then becomes our faith. But here it is. If anyone, you have to pick up your cross. Boy, that sounds awful, doesn't it? Who wants a cross and who wants to pick it up? I want to throw it down. Right? And that can bring up all kinds of negative feelings and connotations depending on what your fundamental teaching was when you were young. It does for me. That's not what he was talking about here. He's talking about pick up the old humanness of yourself. Your ego, if you want to call it that. Paul later on calls it the carnal mind. The mind of flesh. The human rational mind that wants to build all of these error beliefs into you. You're not worthy enough. You're not good enough. It can only happen to those people, not to you. Those are lies. But we have accepted them to be part of our subconscious. And this is what he's talking about, is pick that stuff up and come on, let's go. Follow these few little things I'm going to teach you, and you too can enter and live in the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God. So what are the key points? What I'm trying to do here is pull 4 or 5 key points out of each chapter. So even if you don't want to, you don't have to read it. But if you take these in and begin to implement them into your life, so what was the number one that she said? Having more of God in our lives doesn't take away the good things. It puts more of the good in you now. I don't know about you, but back in the day when I was young, and this whole idea of denying myself and chasing after this, like, well, boy, I'm not going to have any fun anymore. Right? That's not what the teaching is at all. It's denying that human part of ourselves that have bought into the untruth about us. And what she's saying here is when you do that, you don't come to a place of lack. You come to more good. Because we know God is only good. So as we align ourselves more and more with the divine, we're going to see more and more of this happen through our thinking first, then our emotions second, finally in our bodies, and then into our experience in the world. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Nancy was stuck a year or so ago. And she began to put these processes in place. And that is not lack and limit. That's someone got connected with more good that's flowing through her. And now it's manifesting into her body, and it's manifesting into her experience in life. It works all the time, she says. Dr. Emily Cady said this process works all the time, if you and I work it. But we many times stop before it manifests. Nancy stopped a couple times along the way. She said to me on Tuesday night, I can't believe how long it took. I said, it took the perfect amount of time. And that's true for all of us. As we're in the process working and releasing that old stuff that's holding us back for whatever reason that is not true, we can begin to bring more and more of the good into our lives. Number 2 in lesson 4, our mistaken beliefs about God and ourselves cause all of our suffering, loss, and distress. All. Now the question you have for yourself is, do you believe this? Because if you begin to believe this, there's no more room for victim mentality. There's no more, oh, it was that person made me feel this way and that's why I'm upset. That all goes away. But the beauty of it is if you're willing to take that responsibility at that level, then you have the ability to begin to become master of your life and build it into all good that's coming your way. But we first have to get to this place. There's no more excuses. 140 years ago she wrote this. I mean, I'm blown away every time I go through this and the depth of the teaching here. Our mistaken beliefs, our error beliefs, those things that we have accepted to be true of ourselves which are not, have created all of our suffering and our loss and distress. So here we begin denial number 1. Okay, time for my public confession. I've been studying this work for 30 years. I had to study this in ministerial school in Unity. And there's a piece in this chapter 4 and 5 that I never did. And she says, you must memorize all of these. I never did. I memorized this one. I got it. That's as far as I got it. I was like, how did I miss that piece? So in the last couple of weeks, I began to memorize these. And I got them on cards, and I got them in my office, and I have them where I do my God time in the morning. They're everywhere trying to, and my first reaction you may not do this, but I did. I was like, there's too many words. When I looked at 4 denials and 4 affirmations, like, too many words. We got to get this down into the Cliff Notes version. No. These words have held up for hundreds, 50 years. And when I began to surrender to the process and began to actually do the work to memorize them, I realized the power that I had missed. Because as you work to memorize, they go deep, deep into your subconscious. And it begins to throw out the error beliefs that I had. So this is number 1, denial. There is no evil. Now, if you don't like the word evil, you can put negativity, you can put badness, things that aren't right, things that they're just not right. Stop for a minute. I want you to think back over this past week to last Sunday. How many times did you think or say something wasn't just right? That's just wrong. I don't hear a lot of people say, well, that was evil. But it was negative. It just, what the point is she's making here is we focused on the error belief. And when you begin to take this in and say, there is no, you can put anything that's holding you in bondage to evil. If you're sad, you can say there is no sadness. If you're poor, you can say there is no poverty. But in the beginning of what she's doing here is taking it directly to the piece that's holding us in bondage. And it's different for everyone in this room. And what I love about the teaching, because if you learn the principles, you can apply it to anything in your life that's holding you back. So number 1, there is no evil. Well, that just kind of wipes out Satan, didn't it? He doesn't exist anymore in this belief. He doesn't exist for me either. But I'll tell you a quick story. I knew a minister who had come back from Haiti. In Haiti, satanic belief is the country's religion. This poor minister saw Satan every corner he went. I mean, he was looking under the bench and saw him. Why? Because in his mind it became real. He lived in that environment, in that community where that was true. They had the voodoo doctors and people died. Why did they die? They died because they believed that the voodoo doctor had power, not because some power of Satan. It was a belief in the mind. But I watched this poor man. He was tormented because his whole life was around evil, and his focus was, I'm trying to get away from what? Evil. So he just created it everywhere he went. I mean, I sat down one time in his house, and he turned around and goes, he's behind you. I looked back, I said, I don't see anyone. I was like, that's the last time we had a visit. But it's true. Whatever you focus on, you can make from a negative standpoint. So there is no evil, number one. That's the easy one to memorize. Now it's going to get a little harder. Number two, there is no absence of life, substance, or intelligence anywhere. No absence. We talked last week, what is substance? Substance means a sub-thing that stands underneath the physical. It's the invisible, it's in spirit form. And she's saying, and this is so key in this, because there's no absence of it, because we believe there's absence. Do we not? We don't believe that we're worthy of the allness of God when he says, it's my greatest pleasure to give you and you and you and you and me all of it. We don't believe that. We think we're limited. And what she's saying here is release that error belief. There is no absence of life, substance, or intelligence anywhere in the universe. When you begin to do these denials, what happens is all those subconscious beliefs begin to release. And that's the work. And we're going to talk about how she talks about implementing. But you can see the words are getting more words. You have to put more effort into this to really memorize it. And I realize now for 30 years I skipped this piece. No more. It's too important for me to make happen and memorize. Number 3, pain, sickness, poverty, old age, and death cannot master me, for they are not real. How many of us this past week talked about any one of these and tried to make it real in what we thought and what we said? If you start doing these denials, those error beliefs that you're holding in your subconscious on these subjects begin to go away. They just absolutely leave. But this was pretty courageous 100-some years ago to tell people where they were. I mean, look at where we are in consciousness as humans compared to 100-some years ago. This woman couldn't vote. She couldn't own land. But she had the audacity to stand up and say, there's no pain, there's no sickness, no poverty, no old age, and no death. Cannot ever master me. Why? Because it doesn't exist. I mean, she wasn't that far behind when they burned him at the stake, you know. That was about 100 years before that. But she knew what the truth was for her. And she lived, folks, to 94 years old. Why? Because she believed this. And she got rid of the belief that sickness was possible, that old age was happening. Number 4. I love this one. There is nothing in all the universe for me to fear, for greater is he that is within me than he that is in the world. Nothing to fear. What's the subsets of fear? Worry, anxiety, fear. Anybody have any of that this week? We're seeing a lot of it, aren't we? Not just in this country, we're seeing it around the world. There is no thing, there's nothing or no person in the universe for me to fear. For what is inside of me is greater than anything that shows up in the world. Let me ask you a question. If you can think back through your life, jump back to when you were very young. Think how your life would have changed if you had believed this. What would you have been possible for you to do that you didn't? Because some way, somehow, fear got in your way. And she's saying, no, it doesn't exist. And finally, this one is not one of her denials, but I love this statement. As spirit, which you and I are, as a spiritual being, disturbing emotions are not part of me and have no power over me. Who had disturbing emotions this week besides me? Yeah. Not part of you. No power over you. Can you imagine as you begin to integrate these into your being, into your subconscious? And when they start showing up, you have that denial right there and say, no, that has no power over me. That's how this process, that's why these principles, that's why these lessons work, no matter what the issue is, she says. So let's go on the other side of it is affirmations. So it says this in Job, thou shalt also decree a thing, or affirm it, and it shall be established unto you, and the light shall shine upon your way, upon your path. Now, number one is, who has to decree or affirm it? You and me. But that's where our job ends. It gets established to us. It doesn't say, I got to establish it. It says, it will, when I'm in alignment with the law, the principles of the universe, as I decree it, as I affirm it, that creative life force or God or whatever you want to call that energy goes to work to make that happen. But most of us are affirming the negative in our lives, are we not? When I hear some people talk, you'll hear the limiting talk. You'll hear the limiting words. And my ear is so attuned to it, and not only for my own life, but in my process of coaching with people. Check your words, check your thoughts, and what are you affirming? Because whatever you're affirming will be established to you. Because that's what you're bringing into you through the energy of the creativeness. This is the other one that she goes to all the time, which I absolutely love. This is the law, according to God. Whatever thing you ask when you pray, believe that you have already received it and you will. When I coach someone, they say, well, you know, I've been praying for this, so tell me how you prayed for it. And the first thing I will hear, number one, is they didn't ask for what they wanted. They missed step one. But step two is where most people do. If you're asking for what you want and it hasn't come, step two is where the stop is. Believing that you already have received it. And we're going to talk, the rest of this talk is about moving to that place. So key points of lesson number 5. Number 1, we can bring any desired good into our lives by persistently claiming that it is already there. You see how it's already in alignment with what this teaching was? This is the piece that most people quit on. Number 1, they're not persistent. And number 2 is they don't keep going until it arrives. And the teaching is here, do not stop. Keep affirming that's already here. And anything, she says, any desired good. Is there any lack and limitation in that statement? None. The allness of God is yours and mine to have if we're willing to do this piece of the work. And it's not hard work. This is not go out and break up rocks with sledgehammers in 90-degree weather. This is consistent, persistent, focused. And I tell everyone that I work with, take one thing. Because what does our ego want to do? It's like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'll solve all the problems. We'll take all 9 of them. Right? It doesn't work. You've got to stay focused. Take one. And some people want to take the biggest and work it. Some people want to take a small one. It doesn't matter. Work the process. Keep doing it until you see it arrive and manifest in your life. Once you have that, you have a knowing, do you not? But until you do that, it's just noise. You're just talking about it. You are not a doer of the word. A doer of the word successfully makes it happen. Take one. Work through this process. and watch what begins to happen. Denying and affirming can be used to solve any of life's problems. Denials tend to erase or dissolve. Affirmations build up or give strength or power. Any human issue. Really? Yep. If we take the principles, if we take the lessons, and we're consistent with it, and what I would ask each one of you, take something you're in bondage, take something of your Egypt, and begin to work the denials and the affirmations persistently and see what happens. And one of the greatest ways to get there that I missed for 30 years is to do the work she asked us to do, and that's to memorize. I'm seeing things happen in my life faster than I ever have. But I finally surrendered to the idea that I need to memorize all these words. And she put it there for a reason, obviously. I was a little slow in the uptake on that one. Affirmation number 1. God is life, love, intelligence, substance, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. This is where it came from in unity. This is where it came from in science of the mind and divine science. This is where new thought made the move that God is one power, one presence, only good, and is available in each and every atom in the universe. Came from this teaching. Can you imagine what happens in your life if you memorize just this one? God is life. Well, that means there's no death. It's love. That means there can be no hate. Intelligence and wisdom. That means there can be no stupidity. And substance is what we cannot see. Substance is behind the plant. And it's available everywhere in the allness of the divine. Number 2, affirmation. I am a child or a manifestation of God in every moment. Every moment. His life, love, wisdom, and power flow into and through me. Every moment there's a flow. We talked about this on Tuesday night. What it feels like to be in the flow of the divine versus being separate. The paradigm of separation versus the paradigm of oneness. This is oneness. When you're in the flow of the divine, and the life and the love and the wisdom and the power is flowing through you, then you are connected in that oneness. And she goes on and ends this affirmation with, I am one with God, and I am governed by this law. Powerful things to begin to build in your subconscious and to begin to believe and to know that it's possible for you. Affirmation number 3. I told you the words keep getting longer, don't they? You're going to work your memory. I am spirit, perfect, holy. How many of you were taught you were holy? Yeah, they missed that one in my teaching. They had other words for it. It was the opposite of holy. That's for sure. I am spirit, perfect, holy, harmonious. Nothing can hurt me or make me sick or afraid, for spirit is God, and God cannot be sick or hurt or afraid. I manifest my real self through my body now. You can use whatever word here you want, the I am, the Christ within you, Atman. I use my completed soul, the Christ, manifesting that through the true self, not the human self, the true self, through my body now. What I love about this affirmation, and most spiritual teaching doesn't do this, is getting connected with the substance or the spirit and saying, I need to bring that through the body and through the body into my experience. And she doesn't miss that here. And finally, affirmation number 4, God works with me to will and to do whatsoever he wishes me to do and can never fail. I thought about this week. If I had had this affirmation memorized, how my life may have changed if I truly believed that I could never fail. With God working through me, it cannot fail. Very, very powerful place. And again, we go back to this. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, and you believe that it already has happened and received, it's yours. Out of Mark. Okay, last lesson was faith. It's called the master key. Hebrews says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. Don't miss this piece, because this is the only teacher that I know is teaching that faith is the substance of everything you and I don't have in our lives. Substance being stands under, right? So we know God, there's divine substance in all the physical, but what she's tying it in here is our substance is our faith. Our faith is what brings forth the things that are in the unseen, the invisible to make it visible. And our faith is what creates that power underneath it to have it manifest in our lives, in our bodies. And we've all heard this, if I had faith the size of a mustard seed, I could tell the mountain to jump, and it jumps. What he's saying here is that's all the faith you need to get started. You don't have to have all the faith. You just need to have a little faith that becomes that substance that's underneath everything. So, number one in lesson 6, whatever we desire is in the invisible substance surrounding us and takes form according to our faith. This is a very powerful teaching. Because number one, it says here, if you have desire says of spirit, it's coming from God. If you have a desire to do something good, that desire is an alignment coming through you from the divine. We've been taught many times that, we got to curtail our desires. That's not what she's saying at all. It says you can have all the desires that are in alignment with the good of the divine, and the divine wants you to have it all. And what she's saying here, it's already done. It's in the invisible substance waiting for you and me to bring it forth. Take a moment, breathe that in. Everything you desire for yourself is already available. Quantum physics says it's the field of unlimited possibilities. The quantum field. It's what science now calls. What she's saying here in that invisible substance, everything that you and I could ever want is already a done deal. It's just invisible in the substance. And it comes to us, it takes form according to our faith. Our faith now, you can see how she's moving that from the invisible, and our faith is what brings it into manifest into the physical. Very, very powerful way of looking at faith that I have never seen another spiritual teacher teach. Now, we have blind faith. All of us have blind faith. Atheists have blind faith. They have a faith there's no God. That's a faith. Blind faith is this instinctive idea that there's a God. I mean, if I ask everybody in unity, do you believe there's a God? They go, yeah, there's God. That's blind faith. What she's doing is saying there's something different that's much more important, is that we have understanding faith. And understanding faith is built on a realization of these unchanging principles that we have just taught. Unchanging principles. Is born out of the eternal spirit of truth at the center of your being. And that voice is called intuition. Intuition means of spirit. It's that still small voice that comes through. For me, it's not a lot of times a voice. It's more of a feeling. It's I ought to do this. We'll go over there, tap on the shoulder kind of thing. But for everybody, it's different. But what she's saying here is as we begin to understand, we have this knowing or understanding faith that if we follow these principles, we are guaranteed what the result will be. And the only way that result will not happen is if you and I stop until it manifests. Number 4, in spiritual law, if we have certain conditions of the mind, we will have certain results in our experience. That's the guarantee. That's the absolute of the truth of the principles. That's why she called it lessons in truth. We follow the principles, we follow the procedures, the process, we know what the end result will be. The only way it won't happen is if we don't have the faith to continue to bring it forward and be persistent in the process to make it happen. Number 5, there's already abundance enough to supply every human desire. This is not practiced, and it's not taught, and it's not believed. But in that invisible supply called God, or the creative life force, everything for every human possible desire exists into substance. And as we learn, as those truth seekers, on a spiritual journey, we can begin to bring more and more and more of the good into our bodies, into our minds, into our experience, into our relationships, into our finances, into our communities. Number 6, if the good you desire were not already yours, you could never, by any means, desire it. You do not and cannot desire anything that does not already exist or that belongs to another. She used the example in the book of someone desiring another man's wife. And she says, you're not desiring the wife, you're desiring the love that you see in that couple. Your desire is never for something that's someone else's. There is never any fulfillment in taking what someone's. It's in developing it for yourself. And as this person, whoever it might be, can do the denials to let go of whatever, maybe they think they're not worthy of that relationship, as they do the denials, let go of that, and begin to affirm that that is true for them, they too will have what they desired, is the love and the fellowship and the friendship, but not of that what someone else has. That never works for anyone. That's what she says here. Does not already exist, will never ever occur for you. 7, we obtain fulfillment of our desires quickly and effortlessly when we rejoice in God's working in and around us. We thank God that we have, not that we will have, but have now the desires of our heart always. There's a lot of words on that, but it is very powerful. To be able to be a place that we can rejoice that it's already a done deal. And just know that it hasn't manifested or showed up yet in the physical, but in spirit and substance it already exists. And our job is to be persistent, to bring it forth. And this is true whether we're talking emotions, we're talking material things, we're talking relationship, we're talking money. Whatever it is that you're looking in your life to do, this works, no matter what it might be. And our job is to thank God that's already happened. And I've implemented that now in my affirmations. I end them now with thank you, God. Because I want to make sure I always stay in gratitude that it's already occurred and it's on its way here. And that's an incredible place to begin to live from. There's no lack of limitation in that. It's just knowing that I got to stay consistent and persistent with the process. I love this image that she gives about this God's fountain of the all good is within us. And the way she describes it is you got to think about the Godhead, or the fountainhead, or the reservoir, and there's a stream coming into you and me, and in that is this incredible fountain. And she says, pull yourself out of the external, pull yourself out of the circumference, and come back to center where this fountain of God of all good is. And you can begin to do your work from there. You can do your denial work, you do your affirmation work, and you're in that place of not getting entangled with all the human stuff and the human emotions. So here's the daily practice this week. Do the 4 denials every day. By the way, I've made copies for anybody who wants. They're here in the front. The 4 denials, the 4 affirmations. My question to you is, what's holding you in bondage? Take something that's holding you back right now, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationship-wise, financially. Use it. Take that and prove this to work for you. Be a doer of these words, not listen to the words. Put them in action and do it. Do the 4 affirmations this week. And finally, find the belief that you got to hold on to, which is your faith, that is a substance underneath what you're bringing forth to take you from bondage to freedom, whatever it might be. So here's a question. I'm going to challenge you all. How many of you are willing to join me in committing to memorize these 4 denials and the 4 affirmations? How many? I see people shaking their head going. All right, you may not have raised your hand today, but I want you to think about it this week, because I'm going to give you a tidbit from my life. For 30 years, I refused to memorize. And as soon as I began to 2 weeks ago, I can tell you things have changed at a level I can't believe. So give it some serious thought before you continue to say them. It's a lot of words, but it's worth the effort. And I have not made it yet. I don't have them all memorized, but I can tell you I will. So here's the key. Ask, believe, and then you receive. This is the structure of the process that was taught by the master teacher Jesus, and we see Dr. Emily Cady all those thousands of years later teach it again, and we have it for us to work. And unfortunately, in Unity, we have walked away from some of our basics. But this works, and it works every time. And as I've seen more and more Unity leave the basics behind, and what's happened is they're not manifesting from bondage to freedom. We're not going to let that happen here. All right? So think about it. Join me. I'd love to have an email when you say I memorized all of them. I'm not going to give the test. You'll know whether you memorized them or not. Okay, let's go to the stillness. Let's take a couple deep breaths. We're beginning to understand at a different level why Master Teacher Jesus called it the good news. And why he called it the way. It's the way out of bondage into freedom. And each and every one of us here today, the number one thing we want is to be free. Why is that? Because our souls have been freed for eternity. And we have put some stuff on it, some error beliefs that are not true. And that's why our soul keeps pushing us to become free. It's that internal push. And as we allow ourselves today to just settle into that fountain within us, that fountain of light, that fountain of love, the fountain of all good. And in this moment, begin in that. Say, you know, I can go to another place of freedom. I don't know exactly all this and what Reverend Dan was talking about, but I can know how to get there now. And I can do the denial work, and I can do the affirmations, and I can move to a place of freedom. And in this moment of stillness and silence, I just want you to feel that freedom. Freedom at all levels. That is your birthright. It's who you were created to be. And we're going to say yes to that life, and that love, and that power, and that intelligence. So it is.